No, all right. We can have a phone call vote. All in favor, say aye. Opposed? All right. All right. Thank you both. I'm gonna at this point gavel over to the chair. Sure. Thank you. All right, I declare this committee meeting at 6:37 open. Okay. So we're going to allow Ms. Sally Include, Director of Finance, to go ahead with the Budget 101 right now to give us the information about Budget 101 for year 26-27.
Thank you. I did want to just start by thanking you guys for all being here today and through this spring, through the budget process this year. It will be a few meetings between now and the end of May. The budget committee process begins with a couple of preliminary meetings. These are more just 101. Sorry.
Sorry.
And for the record, we're gonna, Brisa Franco is here at 5:33 p.m.
That's the right one. Okay. The first couple of budget committee meetings are really just preliminary ones. They're tonight and then April 14th, where we really talk about the ground rules of the budget committee, what our roles and responsibilities are, how we're funded, give that background and information that's going to build that knowledge base to lead up to the proposed budget. May 14th, we'll propose the budget and the budget message to the committee. At that point in time, it will become a public document. And then this committee will have May 21st and May 28th as discussion meetings to review the budget document, discuss, deliberate, ask for additional information, and ultimately approve the budget. And then on June 9th is scheduled for our board hearing and budget adoption so that we can certify taxes and begin expenditures of the new fiscal year. So that's in general the public side of the budget process and the committee's side. So to go into Budget 101 to start tonight, the first part is really about why we're here. Oregon local budget law requires districts and all government entities to hold budget committee meetings and establish standards on how we report our budget document. Through the budget process, it encourages and requires the district and public entities to involve citizens and involve the community through this process. And that can be everything from holding public comment and during our public budget committee meetings. It includes public comment during the budget hearing on June 9th. And it encourages citizen input as being a part of the community and the committee here. And then we take it one additional step and do our community engagement process through that building of the budget side so that we can use that information to guide the development and the proposed budget. It encourages, it requires districts to estimate our revenue, our expenditures, and what taxes we need to collect in order to pay our bond obligations. And then ultimately, it is a method of controlling public expenditures. So it sets that max appropriation level that we have for spending each year. In the end, that's what we're looking for, is that maximum appropriation for spending. Budget meeting requirements. We do have to meet all public meeting law requirements. So this budget committee is comprised of 5 board members and then 5 community members appointed by the board. So 10 members total. We do have to have at least 6 members to hold a meeting, to have quorum, and to have any vote. And I did want to just talk a little bit about that. The majority vote of 6 members is required regardless if we have 10 members at the table or we have 6 members at the table. So that majority vote of 6 members is essential in order for us to take action, regardless of how many are sitting at the table that day. Does that make sense? Okay. The budget document itself does not become a public document until it is released to you in May. Up until then, it's a working document. It's an internal document. We're trying to balance the budget, put all the information together, and we're using your feedback and the community's feedback to build it. And then public comment, we typically do public comment on May 14th, May 21st, May 28th, and then June 9th. Those will be the nights that we have scheduled for public comment, if anybody wants to talk about the budget itself. And then the last piece is we do have to have the school board adopt the budget and through this full process by June 30th so that we can expend resources in the new fiscal year. So that is our drop dead date. A little bit about the roles and responsibilities of the different groups that are involved in the budget process. The budget committee itself, this group, is responsible for receiving and reviewing the budget and its message on May 14th. Considering public comment and public feedback, discussing and deliberating the budget and the details within it, and then ultimately approving a budget at the end of the day. The school board sets district goals and policies. The school board, as its own entity, sets staff salaries through association contract ratifications and adopts the budget at the end. And then administration, we work on staffing, program needs, cost increases. We work on all of the details through the budget building. And then once we propose a budget, we really just serve as an advisory capacity to you. A quick reminder of what the budget committee doesn't do, and this isn't to be negative, but it is, sorry, the wrong word. But it is really to set boundaries a little bit. This committee doesn't set staffing, salaries, and benefits levels. We don't talk about individual employees or individual programs. We don't add or delete programs as wholes or develop policies. These are for procedures and systems outside of this role. So when we're looking at the district as a whole, we're really looking at our fund appropriations and higher level. A budget document. This is a screenshot of the adopted budget from last year, or this current fiscal year, 25-26. It's really a plan. It's how we anticipate approaching the upcoming year based on our strategic plan, our students, our enrollment, and this gives us our guiding framework going into the upcoming year based on estimates. It's for July 1st, 2026 through June 30th, 2027. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it is setting that maximum appropriation level, maximum spending for the district.
What is an SLP?
Speech language pathologist. Sorry, acronyms.
Yeah, just to jump in there, I'm glad you asked that question. If there's anything you hear that you want to jump in and ask questions about, please do so. We do have pause points built into today's discussion, but feel free to stop us if we need to clarify.
And as you go through the acronyms piece, we do have a PDF attached to the end of this slide deck with 4 stroke acronyms. So that's a helpful resource as you're going through all of the documents at a later date, but definitely let us know if you have questions. Okay. Now, budget committee options. Once you have the proposed budget document from administration, you're able to deliberate and ask questions and gather more feedback and information. There's really 4 options that we have at the end of the day. You can approve the budget as it's proposed with no changes. You can increase the appropriation amounts. If you think the resources that we have estimated and projected are low, or you think the state is going to add another $1 billion to education funding this year, you can increase the appropriation level by increasing it by major function. So we want X dollars to go to instruction. We want X dollars to go to support services because you're under projecting the resources. Then you can decrease the appropriation amount if you think the assumptions around our resources are too great and we need to decrease our expenditures or hold more reserves at the end of the day. Then we can decrease the appropriation amount by saying we want to decrease instructional expenditures by X dollars, and we want to decrease support services by a certain dollar amount. And this is by the major fund level. And then the last option is moving amounts between major functions. And this is an example is if you think we're spending too much on support services major function and you want to transfer more into instructional services function. The key is it's really going to be from administration to determine where that reduction is taken. So where within that major support services is taken based on the program needs and the rules and requirements that we have behind us. So these are our kind of 4 different options, and it can be a combination of them. So
Expanding on that last one, to add a little bit of clarity, if, for example, the budget committee directs us to move, let's say, $1 million between support services and instruction, that is something we can do. How we offset that as a result of that movement is a decision that the district will make after the budget is approved.
okay. Questions on options?
My question would be, a lot of decisions are made as to how much money we get budgeted by people in Salem outside the district. So we can approve a budget. And then all of a sudden. The bean counters in Salem say, whoops. And it's going to be. A 1%, 2%, 3% cut, whatever. Much like what we've faced in the past. What role does the budget committee have on that? We've made all the decisions, we've done the work that we do based on the knowledge we have, and then all of a sudden, this curveball comes in up into play. Is there any call to bring the budget committee back and say, and I don't think we have to do it, but would it be politic for the board to bring the budget committee back to say, we're all in this together, so let's all have a voice in the decision, realizing that the ultimate decision will come down to the 5 of us that are elected officials, based on a recommendation that might come from this budget committee or from the superintendent staff. Any of that make any sense?
So you're correct. We would just go to the board to ask for appropriation amendment. To do a reduction in the budget, we technically don't have to ask to reduce appropriations. We just naturally do that. And we would work and communicate with the board and the budget committee on what this looks like. Because the budget committee set the maximum appropriation spending for the year. If we get additional resources, then we would come to the board after we receive those additional resources and ask for an increase in that appropriation by major fund and function with an explanation of what the process was. And in the past, we have emailed the budget committee and let them know when there's been significant changes. It's been a few years since there's been changes enough to impact the major appropriation levels mid-cycle. But we do that naturally every year. We look through our cash flow, and if we look at our resources are coming in less than we need to, we monitor and adapt and adjust where necessary as just part of our regular monitoring. It's when it's large increases or shifts at the state level that have a bigger impact.
And addressing that, if we assume a worst case scenario, so an example would be if in September, we learn that the federal government is not going to actually allocate the resources that we would expect, given the number of students that qualify for poverty services. So that would be significant for us, and that would require some shifts across our organization. If we're facing that level of reduction, we would engage again in reaching out to our stakeholders, having some conversation about impact before making wholesale changes. At the state level, we anticipate that the state will do their work related to the state deficit that we currently face before we complete our budget development. And once that is complete, of course, we don't have a crystal ball, but once that is complete, we can move forward for fiscal year 27 with some level of security.
I think years where that is a larger risk point for us is when we have the long session. This year it's the short session, so we should know our funding levels by early March. Whereas some years, the every other year, it could be June 30th before we know what that is. And we are really proposing based on the best estimate we have at the time.
So you go to the board first, and then you call back the budget committee and discuss how you're gonna move between the major allowances, or you just do it and then you don't involve the budget committee whatsoever.
Small changes, we typically do not ask the budget committee to convene again.
Okay.
If there is, as I said, a significant change. And again, I'll go back to the federal uncertainty that we faced this year. we had many contingency plans in place because at one point we weren't sure we would receive any federal money. If that in fact happens again, for us, that's a sizable amount of money. It's about 8% of our overall budget. That would require some engagement with stakeholders because of the impacts across our system. So that is something that we would certainly do. And at that point, the board, the budget committee, others would be involved.
Were we on target from last year?
On target with federal funds?
Is it with everything?
Yeah,
With the-
We'll go through the cash flow for the
Okay.
general fund a little bit later tonight.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
okay, so this is a good stopping point. This is actually one of our discussion points. Many of you have been through this process before. Now that we've spent a little bit of time looking at what the responsibilities are, the flow of the budget process, the question we want to engage with is, based on the responsibilities and that process, what is a successful budget season? What should we strive for as we go through this process? And what we'd like to do is take just a couple of minutes, turn to an elbow partner. I quickly looked around and I can see that we are an elbow partner with at least one other person who has been through this process before. So if I'm wrong in that, raise your hand. We'll make sure we partner you up with a veteran. But have a conversation around this, and then we will call out what we think a successful budget season is going to look like. Okay, 2 minutes. Ready, set, go. Kara with them. Yep. Kara with you. So what do you think a successful budget season?
But, you know, maybe because we had
One that balance.
Yes. Yes. I appreciate that. Yes.
Yeah, one that.
No, I would just
managing the last
think that's the,
Where we've heard.
that's the wild card in the deck is
Especially from our committee, I mean, our committee.
we have education department doesn't know what this stuff.
based on. What
Decisions.
So they have to come up with
Just.
a budget by the end of September, they're from their next fiscal year.
Meet all our needs. Everybody.
That'd be great.
That requires congratulations.
Yeah. Successful, but I'm in the budget on this. I mean, my experience.
So.
They lay it out, that's pretty clear, that's what. We're like, just where's the needs are. But like probably. I just really love that. I think we're gonna be the first time, I guess, I've done it. I like that.
Just.
And they're really good. But I also think that
I like that. Nobody has something in there. It would be ideal if there was. At least everybody has something.
It's gonna be pretty flat.
That's a nice way of phrasing it.
Because of the.
Thank you. All right, time's up. Finish your last sentence, please.
Yes.
We have some diligent note takers, and your comments will actually be recorded, so we can go back and listen to them later. So what do you think a successful budget season looks like? We'll start on the far side here.
Well, I think having Eileen. I mean, I think that, the staff, you know, they look at all the needs of our community and input from the principals and teachers and then presenting it to the committee here that, we go by the professional recommendation. And since I've been here since 2011, it's worked very, very well. And the committees have always been very thoughtful and asked good questions. So I just, I know that Eileen's here, but I also know there's that whole team behind you, but there's a lot of people putting the input in for this, and so it has run very smoothly, and I don't expect anything to change except whatever happens with the federal government. I do want to ask one question is there a percentage we get from, how much percentage do we get from the federal government?
Last year, well, this current year, roughly 8% of our overall budget is from federal funds.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but I wasn't 100% sure. Did you want to add anything? Keith?
No, you have covered it magnificently.
Well, thank you.
Okay, all right, next group.
Okay, we have discussed that the importance of coming out with more education as budget committee members in the following year and continuing to grow. And it was so gracious last year, I got a lot of new information and a lot of my questions were addressed. So I would say also first year members or second year members continuing to learn more and developing a better budget committee as the years go on. And also being able to when we go out into the public as budget committee members, being able to explain what the budget process is or a little bit of the problems or the successes that are facing the district. So being at least some educated members out in the public about what the budget actually is and how it functions and how our schools are impacted by it.
Super, thank you. Melinda, Alma. Do you want to talk?
We just felt that the budget process would be a success if we meet the needs of the district with the student focus in the most efficient, effective way.
Oh. Right. Sounds like a mission statement. Very hard.
That's very pithy.
Yes, right.
Anything else?
Spend the money wisely,
Okay,
allocate the money correctly, spend it wisely.
we strive to.
Yep.
And then for us, Maya, do you mind sharing your analogy? Would you like me to share the analogy?
That's okay, I can share.
Okay.
I kind of talked about how I see things, visually,
Mhm.
and how I kind of see, all the different departments as like cups and our budget as water. And I think as long as, all the cups are filled, I'm not overflowing, right? Because that would be in an ideal world, but with a bit of water stuff, they're all satisfied. That's what I see a good, budget season looking like, as well as transparent, and we said, a budget that kind of meets everybody's needs and meets the community's needs as well. That's what we talked about.
Love that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts about this. Again, we are capturing this and we will use it to inform Budget 102 when we come back here in a few weeks. We're also going to talk later on about how we're going to continue to engage our communities over the next several weeks. And what we learned from you today will inform those processes as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Eileen so we can carry on.
Right. So next, we're going to go in a little deeper into Forest Grove School District, how we receive our resources, how we expend those resources, and our ending fund balance and what that means and look like over time. Looking at our resources, this is 2024-25. It's our last final audited financial statements that we've received. This year is currently just a forecast. But last year we received $177.5 million in total resources. This is in addition to our beginning fund balance that rolled forward. So this is new resources. Looking at that 177 million, we have 48% or $85 million in the general fund. The rest is our restricted grants, our nutrition services, our debt services, our capital projects, and insurance reserve. Our general fund is the only part of that pie that is unrestricted. Everything else that we receive our resources for has to be spent for a specific purpose. Our grants we receive for whatever that grant was written for, Title I-A, IDEA, High School Success, SIA. So we fill out grant applications, we have narratives, and we have to expend those resources in that way. Nutrition services can only be spent for nutrition services. Our debt service is mostly property taxes that we assess in order to pay our prior bonds. And then our capital projects, the reason why it's such a large part of last year's pie is because we sold the second half of our 22 bond sale to generate the resources to finish off the rest of the bond capital projects. So next year it won't be such a big portion. But that's kind of how we receive our resources and where they come from. Our general fund is where we focus most of our time on through the budget process, because that is what we have the most capacity to control. And that's what we use for our general operations, our general instruction, our transportation, our facilities maintenance. That's what we have most of our control for. So we will focus on that the rest of today, pretty much. And primarily through our budget process. Looking at that general fund, the $85 million comes from a few different places. Our state school fund is the biggest part. 71.5% of our total general fund resources we received last year. Then we have our state timber, our common school fund, our county school fund, and then property taxes. Property taxes is 20% with the state school fund of 71%. If we look at all of them except for the other bucket, the other resources, that 6%, everything else is part of our state school fund formula, the equalization formula at the state level, and driven by enrollment. So if enrollment goes up, our revenue goes up. If enrollment goes down, our revenue goes down. Our enrollment is specifically tied to our resources. That 6% is the only thing that is not tied to enrollment. Questions on that? I'll go through the state school fund formula in a couple of slides.
Well, I do have a question. I've been reading that they're talking about from the federal government about property taxes, and the federal government can't really dictate property taxes at the state level, can they? No,
Not at this time.
but I mean, what I'm hearing is they're saying that we're going to allow seniors over 65 not pay property tax. And that would be significant for our community because 40% of our community are senior citizens. I know that would be a court case.
We
But you're
would
not-
have to investigate that, and if it happens, we would of course respond and adjust, but as of right now, that's not part of our calculation.
Okay, the state school fund, since that is a primary driver of how we receive our resources. The state takes their state resources plus our local resources and combines it together to create the state funding formula. The state resources include general fund, which is primarily taxes, lottery resources, the corporate activity tax, and marijuana taxes. And then they take all of our local property taxes, our common school fund, our forest revenue, those pieces of the pie from the last slide. And they put them together, and that is then allocated into 3 primary grant buckets. And so there's the general purpose grant, which is distributed to schools based on enrollment and demographics of that enrollment. The transportation grant, which is a percentage reimbursement based on the school district. Ours is a 70% reimbursement rate. So we get 70% reimbursement of all of our qualifiable transportation costs in the district. Qualifiable transportation cost is home to school, special education routes. Unqualifiable transportation costs is athletics. So it's educational purposes, basically. And then the last bucket is the high cost disability. And for forced growth, we get about a 26% reimbursement of qualifiable expenses for high cost disability. When we look at that general purpose grant that's based on enrollment and demographics, that's the biggest part of the state school fund allocation that we have the most resources from. And that is driven by the demographics of our students and the average membership over the course of the year. So it's not at a point in time, we have 5,000 students, we get funded for 5,000 students. It takes the average of the enrollment over the course of the year. Then we look at the average attendance, over the course of the year. Then modified. Then we get an additional weight for students on an IEP that's capped at 11% of our enrollment. You get an additional half a weight for English language learners. You get an additional weight for pregnant and parenting, and then you get an additional quarter weight for poverty and foster students. However, there's a 2-student max.
Could you explain what weights mean?
Weights.
Weighted.
Weights is the accumulation of it. Yeah. I can do it.
Don't fight, children.
The state allocates weights out based on our enrollment and our demographics of enrollment. And they take the combination of all of the weights across the state and then use that to distribute the state school fund. So it's an equity formula. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, I think that was a new concept for me when I came on the board to learn about funding and how kids are weighted and what funding is given.
It's a multiplier and there's limits.
Okay.
So, we have, there's a term we use in education called intersectionality. And what that means is that we have students who are receiving special education services, who qualify for poverty services because their family maybe lives below the poverty level, who are also learning English. And for at least a small number of our students, they may be parents, teen parents. So if you look at all of that, we should be receiving for that one, let's say that's one student, that would be 1, 2, 2.5, 3.5, the per pupil allocation from the state for that one student. And the state does that because they recognize that complexity within student requires greater resources. But the state also caps us. So for that particular student, even though their complexity is great and they may have significant needs, the state only funds us at 2.0 weight. So there's a cap. It's similar for special education in that the state caps us at 11% for our district. And what that means is we are funded up to 11% of our student population that qualifies for IEP services. Our district actually has a 17% number of students that qualify for special education services. And then high cost disability is another cap for us, that 6% of cost is above the average per pupil allocation. And we typically don't receive full reimbursement for the actual cost of high cost disability. And to put some definition around that, high cost disability includes, for example, students who require nursing services to access their education. That would be an example of a cost that exceeds the typical per pupil allocation for not only an average student or a typical student, but even for students that receive special education.
And the typical allocation for per pupil, just for enrollment, approximately in dollars.
I think it's 11,600-ish,
Okay.
somewhere in there.
And so when districts, as they have, we've heard this across the state, when they are allocated funding for students with high cost disability, but it's capped, where does the money come out of districts' budgets then to cover what's not I mean, how do districts manage where they pull that money?
We don't pay for other things. That's the simplest explanation, is we have to cover these costs. They're not optional for us. So in order to cover these costs, we don't pay for other things. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, we'll get there eventually in the discussion, but that's the conversation I think we're having, you know, we have with legislators about where's the gaps in the budget, and we start with, well, first, we are providing these services that the state is not fully funding. But that, I think for people, even in the community, to realize that that does mean we are using existing funding to cover what needs to be covered, and that. So I think that's part of this larger discussion when we're educating the community about where that money is going and why we're advocating for changes to those caps.
100%. Our resources are finite. There's no secret money tree. So we have what we have, and we need to cover the costs that students deserve and which their civil rights demand, of course. And we move things around to make sure that we can do that.
So when this group hears in the news about the conversation about school funding, I mean, these are parts of the conversations that people are starting to, I think, have and understand, that's getting outside of the school district and into the news, right? Of what is it when they're talking about funding and all these things. So I think this year in particular, I mean, I'm very appreciative of where we're going with this committee, but all of the things, of course, that we're hearing, I think are the questions we should bring into this committee as well, to just get some clarification on what that means and see those articles and suggestions. But go on. So I can take it home.
So if I can echo what Dr. West said about we don't pay for other things. My first year as athletic director here in Forest Grove, 1991, 92, I think. The athletic budget was zero. Because we were in shortfall for other things, zero. I got my salary and my administrative assistant got hers. And the coaches, nothing. There was no money in the budget for equipment. So what happened was that we used the booster club, came to the rescue. And that was going to be the case for the second year. And then the state all of a sudden loosened things up. But that was a situation that got a lot of people's attention. And that's where we were in those years, and Director Drandusky, I think, remembers the pain that went across the district, because it wasn't just high school varsity athletics, it was JV athletics, it was middle school, all of that stuff.
Well, I think we also cut buses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was the first and last time that ever happened in the state.
That is.
But it didn't cut all the buses because we still had the obligation for special ed. So yeah, there was because it wasn't surgery, it was coming in with an axe.
Well, to be clear, we're not at a point now where we're going to bring the athletic budget to zero.
Yeah.
Well, I hope not.
But that's an indication of what I was saying, what you were saying was that
Attendance.
we got the money from someplace else.
Exactly.
And, you know, that covered athletics and activities and to some extent field trips, because there were elementary teachers that still felt that field trips were of educational value. I'll shut up.
I did just confirm it is $11,198 per weight for this current fiscal year.
That's really close.
So, yeah. Example of how this works for us in funding. The first dark green is enrollment. This is last year's 5,676 students. And when we look at the funding formula for how the state allocates all the weights, we ended up with 5,673 base weights, 713 weights for students on an IEP, 660 weights for EL. And then we have our poverty, foster, and pregnant and parenting above that. So overall, we had 7,203 total weights that we were funded off of. When we look at that as a whole picture compared to the statewide total weights, it's about 1%. So when we are looking at, or the state is having conversations at the legislative level of cutting 1% of the funding or 2% of the funding, we can then do, we can look at to see what that is. If it's $1 billion, we're 1%. So that is where we sit in relation to the total state.
Is there a number that shows us, these are the funded weights, assuming we hit the caps? Is there a visual that shows how much was not able to be funded? I would like to see like,
I don't have that, but we've calculated.
okay. And it gets back to that piece of, especially in communication, where we can show, here's what we weren't funded to meet these essential needs, and
Oh,
Well,
I
not in a
mean,
visual, but
it's okay. I mean, we don't need it.
well, I think Eileen has it at her fingertips. So
I feel like it's in the movies where the numbers appear in a little bubble above her head, and it's like.
so the gap would really be the difference between our total IEPs and the 11% cap. And the gap is an additional 185 weights if we were fully funded for our students on IEPs.
Gee,
so 185 times 11,000.
Okay, thank you. It's helpful.
Now that's all been about our revenue and how we receive our resources in the general fund and how it's calculated a little bit. Now to talk a little bit about how we expend our resources. This is the last 4 years of our expenditures by major function. The dark green is instruction. The light green is building instructional supports. And the blue is other support services. And so with this, I tried to take out that support services and break it into 2 categories. One is instructional related and one is non. So really looking at the counselors, the health assistants, the professional development and professional learning, the things that are directly impacting the buildings and the instruction, the students, versus the rest is going to be our transportation and our facilities and maintenance and administration and building secretaries and district office, just to have that breakout. So you can kind of see how our trend is on that. We had in 24-25 about 61% of our budget on instruction and 12% on instructional supports, with 27% on other services. When I dove down and looked at 21-22 compared to 24-25 on why that has increased by 1% over the last 4 years, and that's really one of the biggest driving factors is our cost of insurance has been going up 12 to 15% a year, and so is utilities. So that is generally exceeding the cost increases across the district comparison to how other expenditures have increased. So that was one of the biggest driving factors of that shift by 1%. When we look at the same expenditures for the same 4 years, looking at it a different way is taking all of the expenditures and looking at how it's broken out based on object. An object is the type of expenditures, salaries and benefits, subservices, custodial and grounds. Really looking at that as labor costs versus services or supplies and materials. And in 24-25, we had 49% of our budget in salaries, 27% of our budget in benefits, 2% in subservices. Historically, 21-22 and 22-23, subservices was embedded in labor and benefits, but we contract that out now. So that's why you'll see it pop up in the last few years.
The drop in other services and utilities. What is an example?
Other services and utilities, it could be, other services could be contracting SLPs 1 year versus the next, where years that we can't hire, a speech language pathologist, we contract it out. And so it could be 1 year in salaries and benefits and another year in contracted services. So this way is a little bit harder to look at exactly where things are because they do ebb and flow on how we utilize our resources between major object. But really, I mean, the goal is to look at most of our budget is in labor. And if we add custodial grounds and transportation to it, which is heavy labor, just their contracted services, not in-house services, it would add on to it. So this is just one that makes it a little bit harder to look at when we look at comparable districts, because every district is so different on whether they contract services, have them in-house, subs in-house, transportation in-house or not. And so that's where you'll see a much bigger swing is by major object than by major function. Okay.
That charter school payment, is that the same across other districts too that have? Okay,
Different districts have different pass-through rates. There's a state minimum requirement. Some districts only pass through the minimum. I think ours is a little bit higher than the minimum. I think we're doing like 88% right now pass through, which is higher than the minimum, higher than a few of our other local districts that have charters. But it is something that we look at with the charter school every couple of years and reassess how much we're expending internally for their operations, and look at what that pass-through rate should be. Okay, the last is our ending fund balance. I did want to spend a moment here. Our ending fund balance it's really the net between our revenue and expenditures. It's what's left at the end of the day. It's for our reserves moving into the next year and to help cushion any emergencies or things that happen that are unbudgeted. And so historically, pre-pandemic, we really tried to keep the ending fund balance between 10 and 15%. Our target was really around that 12%, kind of went up and down a little bit, depending on the year. And then the pandemic hit, and because of all of our additional resources that we got, the federal funds, the ESSER funds, we were really able to utilize those resources to the maximum. Plus schools were shut down, so we weren't incurring utilities. We weren't incurring the transportation. So our ending fund balance, even though we budgeted for those things, we weren't incurring those. So our ending fund balance did grow over that period of time. And since then, we have been intentionally trying to incrementally bring that down, back down to that 10 to 15%. 2025-26, I do have an asterisk here. It is a little bit lower than where we were planning and where we initially started, but that's because we did a one-time lump sum payment to our PERS reserve, we didn't have appropriation in our PERS account to be able to do that. So we're going to build it into this budget cycle and add it back to the ending fund balance. So it's going to have a little drop down this year in the percent, but the PERS reserve account will refund that July 1st. I just need to wait for the appropriation.
And for those who maybe are unfamiliar with PERS, we may get into a little bit more of this as we go through the budget process. PERS is the Public Employee Retirement Account. They have been operating at a return rate that is below the statutory requirement for many years. Because it is a statutory requirement that this state fund returns a specific percent, it is up to every public entity to make up the difference. So we not only pay in what our standard PERS rate would be, but we have the obligation to pay additional resources to make up the difference in what the fund is not earning or hasn't been earning over all of these years. And that's one of the reasons why you hear PERS as such a topic of conversation around the state, is that every public entity, schools, police departments, fire departments, we are all facing astronomical increases in PERS rates.
And is it, Is there truth in that the discussion around that is people realizing obviously school districts do not have funding to be able to continue to reimburse the PERS rate on top of their rates, and the state is trying to figure out, well, how then are we going to support that PERS but not do it through all these agencies who can't support it?
There's regular conversation around what people will label PERS relief. That relief hasn't come in, I'd say, a broad solution yet. There are some solutions. For example, the side account is one option that we've been able to employ in the past. But as of right now, there's no legislative solution for the gap that all of these public entities have to make up. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm just trying to remember, was the assumption of the governor's increase in the budget for schools last year that does give schools some flexibility, but it was not specifically directed to be able to support PERS, right? So there's a conversation of that needs to happen over here, but as some of what the governor was intending to do is say, look, we're giving you more money.
You're talking about the current service level?
Yeah.
Yeah. Feel free to jump in, Eileen. Yeah, so the currents, so a couple of things, just to get some definitions out there, some vocabulary. There's the QEM, the quality education model, which if you've been reading the paper at all for the last 15 years, you've probably bumped into that when it comes to education funding. That is the aspirational funding goal. That is the financial allocation that the QEM committee says this would be the ideal amount for school districts. That's not how we're funded. How we're funded is based on what is called the CSL. There's another acronym. It stands for current service level. And for many years, that current service level for school districts hadn't changed. It was based on increases in costs from more than a decade ago. That created compounding problems over many years. For example, for school districts, the current service level increase for salaries was fixed at about 2.5% increase per year. It's been years since we've seen that kind of salary increase for our educator colleagues and support staff. It's much higher than that. So that's created, that failure to adjust the CSL has created a compounding structural deficit across school districts for many, many years. There was an adjustment done. There was a group that came together during the long session. They made an adjustment. That adjustment is now baked into statute. So the formula has been updated. It doesn't account for everything. It doesn't account for the full PERS increase. It doesn't account for the increase in benefits or unemployment insurance or the full cost of salary increases that we've seen over the years. But it is something. It does get us closer to what we really need. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Right. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about our financial update, our cash forecast for this current fiscal year. And the first set of numbers is the budget for this current fiscal year. And when we look at our budget, our revenue has to equal our expenditures. So the bottom dark green is our beginning fund balance that was budgeted. The light green is our resources. The dark gray is our expenditures, and then the light gray is our ending fund balance. And so the first bucket is the budget, and then the second bucket is our current forecast. We are currently forecasting about $9.7 million ending fund balance, or 10.2%, based on what we know today. And so that is our current forecast in a visual. And then this is the numbers behind it.
Oh, boy.
Some people like the visuals, some people like the numbers. But really what this is saying is our resources are about 185,000 less than what we had budgeted. And that's primarily because of our forest revenue. The first quarter and second quarter forest revenue came in lower than our historical years and lower than what we had projected. So that is a big contributor to that reduction in resources. However, when we're looking at our expenditures, we're about $2.5 million less forecasted expenditures for this current fiscal year. And that's primarily because of vacancy savings, employee turnover. The district shifted from our paid leave Oregon, from the standard to the state plan. And so that created a little bit of savings, but most of it was from just vacancies. And we have a couple of positions that are still vacant this year, where we budget for our positions to be fully in place all year. So that $2.5 million is primarily from vacancy savings and employee turnover for the year. Otherwise, that 10.2% ending fund balance is about 2.7% higher than our ending fund balance projected with the PERS rate adjustment. So when we take the PERS rate, we came to the board a couple of months ago and asked for appropriation increase to utilize our reserves. So that budgeted ending fund balance of 7.3 million is adjusted for that PERS. That's the difference between the two graphs, is the one is adopted budget and this one is our working budget. Does that make? Okay.
Okay. You notice the teacher does all the discussion. So in terms of our ending fund balance, just a couple things to orient you in a very succinct way. The ending fund balance is our savings account. We use it for emergencies. We use it for contingency. It allows us to expend resources before revenue is reviewed, I should say renewed at the start of each fiscal year. So it allows us to continue operations. In other words, we have expenditures in July, but we haven't received money yet. And having an ending fund balance allows us to carry forward into the new fiscal year. We do have a board policy that says we must have a minimum of 8% as an ending fund balance. For reference, that covers about 1 month of our expenditures. So 8% keeps the lights on for a month. It allows us to cover payroll for a month. It allows us to mow the lawn for a month, to make sure that we feed kids. All of that is encompassed within that 8%. So that is a pretty tight budget. If you think about it, for those of us who are savers, having just 1 month of savings makes us nervous. So I want to call attention to that, and that national recommendations range as high as 25% for an ending fund balance. I don't know any school district that has an ending fund balance that high. That would be ideal. But 8% is also very tight. So there, as Eileen said previously, between 10, 12, 15% is probably a more comfortable range for us. So quick conversation again with Elbow Partners. Based on what you know so far, knowing we can't drop below the 8% floor because our policy prohibits us from doing that, what do you think is an appropriate ending fund target for us? What should we be shooting for as we plan for this next budget? So we will take 2 minutes to have this conversation again with Elbow Partners, and then we'll do a quick report out. Ready, set, go.
In the same end as both of them.
Based on what it was before COVID.
Getting too high, we end up.
Maybe explore that might be an appropriate amount, somewhere between that. It seems like 8% is quite low, 10% is low.
So how do we get to
One
that
off.
question? How do we get to
Wondering whether the ending fund balance is projecting further back into this 2010. Was it always been around? Like 4 or 5% after the 2000s. We did some serious cuts.
And then we built it up and.
Well, I'd like to buy 15.
Fundamental policies.
If
And then
8% is 1 month,
consistent right there, so.
15 would give us almost twice.
Our board policy was 5%.
And that would give you an opportunity.
Okay, so this is not a
Really
legislative, this is.
This is board policy.
check all the cushions and so forth. Like that. Money was there.
So that was tech time, so that was probably more of our, what was that year? The 2007.
Yeah.
The housing market.
Yeah, that's true, that helps.
That was very difficult.
No,
For my time, but I was.
no, I look at this as,
Yes.
if you lack of a better reason. If you fix the ending fund balance, imagine saying,
So I think somewhere.
first year, and then
But it's.
second year, towards,
Okay, finish with your last sentence, please.
again, like you say, spreading it out over 2 years.
Yeah.
For the next 3 years.
All right, so this time we'll go the other way around. We'll start at this end of the horseshoe. Based on your conversation, what is our target? What do you think we should shoot for?
Looking at the historical fund balance in 2015 and 16 and 17, it looks like the district was making an effort to try to maintain it at that 13-14%. I asked Director Clute, and she said during the recession, it went down to 4%. So it's not like it has always stayed at that level, but my thinking was that it looks pretty consistent there for 5 years. Maybe that's a good place to, that's a good goal.
Thank you.
We didn't really come up with a good answer, but depending on how everything looks, we were hoping 15%. I think that's what we kind of.
That's helpful, thank you.
I think our discussions were between that 14 and 16%. Striving for 16 and then having a margin.
Great. Thank you. Our last group,
Well, the 15,
super,
I was thinking 60.
16.
Yeah, but the question is, how do you get there? I mean, there's some challenges, but you can't do it in 1 year. And then this next 3 years are gonna be challenging. So I guess you try to increment it by 2% or something.
Could be. Right now, these are targets. We have yet to build the budget, but knowing what this group is thinking allows us to get started with that process. So thank you for that. All right, back to you.
I had one quick question on that. We briefly talked about it, but on the budgeting or planning, when this has happened before, has it been an all or nothing? Or is it more expected to say, okay, we're not getting funding for 20% of my budget. Oh my gosh. Or is it we're getting no money, it burns up in 1 month versus, is there any precedent that we've seen before on, does it get fully turned on or off? Or is there?
You're referencing the ending fund balance specifically, utilizing that.
I'm referencing if we have no funding, we get by for 1 month if we have 8%.
Yes,
But that's if we get nothing.
correct.
So has there been a precedent before of where we don't receive the funding we're expecting, but usually it's 10% short or 20%, and that scenario would be 5 months.
I'm gonna tee this up and then Director Clute can add specificity. I don't know of any instance where the state has completely withheld a state allocation. What I do know is that districts are sometimes caught short because they haven't accurately estimated their ADM or their local revenues. And when that equalization is applied, they find that they're suddenly millions of dollars short. That is one reason why you've seen districts in the news suddenly need to shut down schools in the middle of the year or let staff go. Would you like to add some specificity to that?
Yeah, two different pieces to that. I want to talk about the state school fund and the adjustments, and then really we're waiting on the property taxes to come in November. So the state at times, they have always given us the resources in July for our funding. Now they've come back and given us more resources, or come back and given us less resources. But really that property tax revenue doesn't come till November. Whereas we pay August salaries to licensed staff, even as 1/12 of their salary in August and September, and then October and November. And so trying to flex the resources and the cash available on hand until that property tax resources come in, that's really kind of that pinch point. And to adjust for any emergencies or shifts or changes in funding levels. So that's one piece. And then the other piece that you were aiming towards is the adjustments in the state school fund. We're always navigating 3 fiscal years with our state school fund formula. We're navigating our current fiscal year where the state is constantly adjusting the estimates based on new updated data. So our EL data comes in, we get new estimates. Our special education data comes in, we get new estimates. Property tax revenue. So we're constantly teacher experience. There's so many factors in that we get multiple updates throughout the year. So we're always looking at that, looking at the state's calculations and then adjusting it based on what we think it's going to happen, what's going to happen next time based on what we know. So there's this current fiscal year that we're navigating. And at the same time, districts are finalizing their audits and they're finalizing their enrollment and their average daily membership over the course of the year. So in the late spring, ODE goes and re-reconciles last year. So this is where districts have gotten caught, where you estimate local revenue to be a certain amount, or you estimate your enrollment to be a certain amount. And then you get that May state school fund adjustment. When it's in May, it's already too late to make adjustments. So those reserves help offset any surprises that you might come. So yeah, we're always looking at the prior year, current year, and next fiscal year, and trying to figure out, like, if something changes, how is that impacting all 3 years, so we can plan and adapt for it as quick as we can. So.
Yeah, and in 2010, 2011, we were in January, we were in the hole, and so we had to cut staff and cut days. And that was really hard in the middle of the year.
Do we know any of the districts in Oregon where it's close to the national 25%?
No.
Do we know any state in the United States where it's close to 25%?
I don't know.
I don't know. I know there are some municipal agencies that get close to that. I don't know of any school districts that get close to that.
Can I ask one more question? I like the conversation, but I did see a few people referring back to this slide. And if you look at the slide, the line with the black dots is our budget, where we budget our ending fund balance each year. The green is where we actually come in at by the end of the current fiscal year. Because our practice in the district is to budget conservatively and try to be as efficient as possible through the year to save. So then we can take that ending fund balance and rebuild it into the budget process the upcoming year. It helps take the waves in funding and the waves in expenditures and level it out a little bit. So based on that, does it change the discussion from the last question? I kind of went sideways, sorry.
I am jumping in because I did hear some testimony in Salem from people, and I've heard this from more than just in this testimony, and I remember because I had asked Dr. West about it, and it goes back to your 25%. People who aren't in the district saying, oh, these districts have, why are they keeping 10%? Why are they keeping 12%? We're in a deficit. We need to be keeping the light, doing these pieces. And I think how you just explained it here, I think if we can find a way to help people understand why we need that reserves, and that those reserves aren't just there until we feel like all of a sudden they should be spent, like there's an intent for the reserves. But I do remember hearing testimony kind of pushing legislators to say, hey, our schools have plenty of money. And the reason is there's schools that have, this one person said, there's schools out there that have 25% reserves. And I remember calling you, Dr. West, to say, are there schools that have 25% reserves? So I think the narrative of how this budget committee approaches this, and how we build in understanding with the community and our staff too, why that is important. I'm in full support of, someone said it, Kate, maybe shooting for the 16%. And the message should be, yeah, we would love to have 16. That's my personal opinion. Where we are typically is here. Instead of having that be down here, I just think that telling people why that number is important to keep high, because it's the tendency for people to just see it over there and say, so there's an education piece with our legislators to understand. This isn't about asking schools now to drop their balances to 5% or 4%. This is about telling we need, and so this, again, there's a lot of editorializing there, but I do have some strong feelings about that myself.
You hide it so well.
I do. All right, and others?
Well, I think that this is the reason why I keep saying we should go to Salem, is because if you say it takes, 8% is, 1 month working, paying salaries and utilities and that, then, it's a whole different ballgame looking at it, instead of just saying, okay, they got, 20%, they got 10%, they've got plenty. They don't understand. I mean, and you also have to recognize that majority of the legislators are not educators and haven't
Right.
been in the school systems and understand how these budgets work,
I don't know.
and they're the ones that created this budget.
Mhm.
And also, the funding for education in Oregon is archaic.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna tell them that, but it is.
And in
Well,
the
they
case
need
of,
to hear
Yeah,
it
they need
because
to.
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I guess they do.
And in the case of this specific deficit, we also have the Education Stability Fund. And that is a fund that has been filled over the years with lottery funds that actually does have a cap. And there is a statutory requirement that if we draw down those funds, the lottery fills it again. So the state does have access to a potential resource to keep schools stable during this deficit period at the state level, and the statutory mechanism to refill that fund if they choose to utilize it. So that is one option that the state may exercise as they look to balance their own budget. But for us internally, I think the more education that we can do among ourselves so that we can help others understand the complexities that we're navigating. And examples like, do you feel comfortable having less than a month's savings to cover your own expenses? Because as a school district, I have an obligation to pay people. I couldn't imagine not paying people for a period of time that they work. That's a heavy responsibility. I think that's where we can generate some understanding among our colleagues in our community about why having some level of savings matters.
Thank you guys for the discussion. Next up, we're going to talk about the budget outlook and challenges looking into this upcoming budget cycle and budget season. Just because, Forest Grove School District, we are facing about $3 to $4 million of deficit spending going into this fiscal year, this calendar, budget calendar year. Our challenges and the reasoning behind this is really 4 primary driving factors. One is our state funding, declining funding, compounding effect over multiple years that Dr. West talked about a little bit earlier. Expenditures outpacing revenue, years of declining enrollment, and years of increased staffing costs and staffing levels. We've been providing more and more services across the district than we have historically. And so I'll go into each of these 4 in the next few slides a little bit more detail. So if we look at where the state is expending its budget, allocating its budget, back in 2003, 2005 biennium, the state allocated about 45% of their budget to K-12 education. This biennium, it's about 33% to K-12 education. So the state is allocating less and less of their pie to school districts. Then we have our state legislative session that is going to end on March 9th. We'll have a better insight if our funding is going to change this upcoming year. We kind of briefly talked about a little bit of it earlier, but the state is still forecasting deficit of about $500 million to the statewide funding. And so if they do choose to impact K-12 education as a part of that, we will receive a loss of our resources going into this budget cycle. And so we are aware of it. We're looking at it, trying to understand what the potential impacts would be. But that's where, when we talk about that $3 to $4 million, it's because there's still a lot of unknowns right now at this time in the budget process.
But on March 9th, the short session closes. So we have only a couple of weeks left for the legislature to decide how they're going to balance the state budget. We'll know soon.
The next thing impacting our budget cycle this year is our declining enrollment. Since enrollment is so heavy driven on our revenue for our general fund and in a lot of our grants, our enrollment is down about 538 students over the last 10 years. We have less kids in the system today than what we did 10 years ago. We're down to 5,554 students projected for this year. This is average daily membership over the year, so it's not enrollment at a point in time. There's a lot of factors included in that, and our demographic study that we're working on right now is already giving us indication. We don't have it back yet, but they're already giving us indication that we will see several years in the future continuing to decline in our enrollment. So this isn't the lull. And then we have our structural deficit spending. This is the same chart from earlier, just again provided because our ending fund balance is our savings account. It's one-time resources. So once you build that into the budget, if you utilize long-term expenditures with those resources, something's got to give somewhere. We cannot keep spending at the current rates and bringing that down that ending fund balance. So we have the deficit spending and eating into our savings account, which is intentional. We've been intentionally doing that the last few years because we had such a high ending fund balance. And then the other one is expenditures outpacing revenue. There's a lot here, but what I really wanted to share is just an example of what we mean by expenditures outpacing revenue and how it's not sustainable long-term. If we look at our general fund revenue, last fiscal year, it increased by about 4.6% total. And that's with declining enrollment. So that's adjusted for a little bit of a loss of enrollment that year. But at the same time, our expenditures are increasing at a significantly greater rate than our revenue. So that year, licensed salary table increased about 5.25%. Then if a employee moved off step, it's an additional 3%. If an employee moved a column, it's an additional 5%. So columns are over on the educational experience, steps are years of experience. And so an employee could have moved between 5.25% to 8, 10, 13% up on the salary table, depending on where they are. And then we add on top of it the increased costs and benefits. So when we look at the total costs of benefits, Oregon paid family medical leave, medical insurance, our PERS retirement costs, those increased by 2.1% of salaries. And so when we add all of these up, our general fund resources only increasing by 4.6%, we can't sustain it. And then the last part in this section is really comparing our declining enrollment versus our increased services to students and increased services across the district. This chart shows in the blue as 2015-16 is our base, our ground zero. And looking 10 years to today of 25, 26, we've lost that 538 students, 538 students across the entire district. Whereas the orange is showing our FTE, which is our full-time equivalent, 8-hour employee. And our total FTE across the district for the same 10 years. So as we've lost 538 students, we have increased 139 FTE across the district over 10 years. Looking at where that FTE is, we've increased our counseling services. We're down to 250 to 1 across the district. We have mental health services. We have health IAs. We have instructional supports in the district. We have more special education IAs across the district. So we have overall more bodies in the district to provide services that are essential, but less students. And so this is one of the things that we're navigating going into this year. If I look at 2015-16 to today, we had an average district-wide teacher to student ratio of, I think it was 29 to 1, and now we're at 25 to 1. So we've brought that average number of students per teacher down significantly. So there are a lot of additional services that we have, lower class sizes, all really great things. But these are definitely things that we are going to have conversations about and navigate through this budget season.
Okay, so a quick discussion question here. School finance is super complex. We've barely scratched the surface. We could spend all night here and all the rest of the week if we really wanted to get into it. Oftentimes, I am asked by people when I'm out in the community, what's going on with school finance? 11.4 billion, how could you possibly be out of money as a school system across the state? And I get it, that's an incredibly large number. So I find myself in a position where I need to quickly help the folks that I'm talking to understand a very complex subject in terms that take less than a minute or two to explain. So the question that we have for you is, given what we've shared here tonight, if you were asked by a community member, what's going on with the financial position of the district, what would you tell them? What is the one sentence that you would provide? May call it an elevator speech. What is your elevator speech that you would share with people? Again, we'll take just a couple of minutes, talk to an elbow partner, and we'll have a round table out and listen to what you share. All right, 2 minutes. Ready, set, go.
Your thoughts? That's a lot.
Precarious.
Right?
Because at this point,
Yeah. Salary of something.
Adopted a philosophy of,
and then going to impact this.
I'm not blaming the leaders, any of the people that came before, or any of the other budget committees.
What's above all?
It was like when we were, doing city stuff. It got to the point where the budget committee members there, somebody will come by and say the single happen. And that stopped happening. I was on the terror there. I think it was about the same time we, around when we were sitting. Yes, but. And everybody realized. We're scraping the bottom of the and this we had not built up an ending fund balance. We were, because there were cities that were on the verge of going bankrupt. But we never approached that. I think the same is here. That's why we get areas. Why that word. It's gonna take balancing it in the next couple of years. until somebody takes legislative. That's do something about getting the education budget arranged, and that requires you to do something to make.
Okay, finish up your sentence.
Business
Action.
or practice to people working with
We're gonna start in the middle of the table this time.
Okay, we just cobbled it together. Our school district budget is 180 million. We can account for every dollar that we spend prioritizing kids based on our strategic plan. And we are extremely comfortable, or no, we're not comfortable. One of the reasons, this is in one sentence, I'm getting there. Our budget is 180 million. We can currently account for every dollar we spend on, and it is on kids. And the reason we feel very confident about this situation we're in right now is because we have a CFO. And I mean, that is an important piece to communicate to the community, but that was something that you said it, Jordan, best, right? I mean, I'm building it into the explanation because I think the community knowing that we trust and value our CFO, who is guiding us essentially in responsible spending. So we can account for the money, we have a key person in place, and we're prioritizing kids. That's our sense.
Set.
They got me there. I mean, I was kind of, gotta, yeah.
All right, we'll go this way around.
We could say, not even in a sentence, in one word, precarious.
Perfect. All right, let's move on.
Well, I got down into the weeds. School district has received 12% less in state funding over the 20 years, and our expenses have increased specifically after COVID and geared toward mental health, special ed, and services. And we have a savings account that would let us operate for 2 months.
If we got to 16%, yeah, for sure.
Oh, okay, so 1 month,
Right.
okay, so maybe 1 month and 1 day.
Yeah, that's great. Thank
Okay.
you. All right, our last group.
Okay, I will share. So I shared that indications where they have brought it up to my attention, just community members. It's a simple, how involved have you been? Have you looked at the resources? Have you viewed these recorded budget committee meetings? For those that are Spanish speaking that don't understand that language, we always have Spanish speaking services that doesn't get used. That's money that's there as well. So it's more like, here's the link, get involved. And you will find those answers if you really are looking for that truthfully.
Yeah, I love that. Now I know what to say to people. Thank you.
You're welcome.
On social media.
All right, excellent. I'm gonna pitch it back to Director Coop to wrap us up.
All right, so I know we are a little behind time, so I will try to go efficiently. The last conversation we have is just to let you know what our steps are for the community engagement process during the budget season this year. We are doing our community engagement in 3 phases, and all 3 phases are going to, one, help guide the next phase and help guide the overall budget process throughout this season. The first phase is our digital survey. It was published a week or 2 ago. Audience is families, community, secondary students. We have already staff, families, community, yes, staff. We've already received it over 400 survey results, and Neil Armstrong will be sending it to advisory next week, I believe. So we will close it at the end of next week. That will then help guide our next budget conversation we have here. The data is going to help guide an equity committee meeting that we have tomorrow night. And then all of this information will be brought back to the next budget committee meeting. The second phase is really building engagement. We're going to develop a presentation or slideshow for engagement for our building administrators to take both their staff and their community to. And hopefully we'll be able to generate some good dialogue and some feedback that's more than a budget form. Like, what do you prioritize?
And that'll be in-person engagement.
And then the last one is phase 3, community leaders. Dr. West is hosting a community leaders budget meeting where we can take them through a similar process from the first two and strategically focus it on specific community leaders greater than just our families, our community, and our students and staff. So any questions on these 3 phases?
So you mentioned that this digital survey launched, where do we find that, or are we filling it out, or is anybody? Because I thought it was just for high school and NAMS. Okay,
It's on the district website.
okay,
It was also in Dr. West's superintendent message last week.
okay.
There's tents at the library with QR codes you can scan.
At the Forest Grove Library.
Right.
Okay.
So we're trying to get it out there as much as we can. And if you need a link, you guys are more than welcome to fill out the survey, attend the community meetings at a building if you want. Each building will have their own community outreach parent meeting. So if you are interested in one, we can definitely let you know when those are to attend. And please provide your feedback and be participants through these.
Between all of these sessions in phase 2, well, if we include phase 3, we'll have more than 20 in-person engagements to talk to our communities and provide people an opportunity to share with us in person what they're thinking about the budget reductions. When we are potentially looking at $2 to $3 million, if that may not seem like a lot when we're talking about an overall budget number in the 100 millions, but or for us in the general fund around 80 million, but $2 to $3 million will have an impact across our system. It will be felt. And because of that, we want to make sure that we're engaging people and providing us input and feedback on what matters to them.
So, quick question, on the surveys that are being taken, that was something from survey that I did, or from parent teacher conferences, is there dialogue that'll be going back to the people that filled the surveys out on, we received your feedback, these are the results, and this is either what we're going to do or what we can't do and why, based on some of the feedback we received, or?
Well, the survey is not what we're making decisions from. The survey is going to inform the in-person conversation. Once we have those in-person conversations, we will take the survey feedback, which helped us prioritize what matters to people, take the feedback we receive from those in-person engagements, and we will use that to inform the building of the budget and potential reductions. All of that will be communicated out.
So what role do we play? Do we go to those meetings as community leaders? Do we go as cheerleaders? Do we go as, I hate using air quotes, experts? I mean, we're where the rubber meets the road as far as building a budget or paying a budget.
Yeah, our building leaders are scheduling those meetings right now. Once we have the schedule finalized, we'd be happy to share it with this committee if you'd like to participate in any of those. Every meeting will be led by a school leader and a cabinet leader. You are, as I said, welcome to be there and be a part of those conversations, but we didn't feel like we needed to put that responsibility on the shoulders of this team. Those engagements are our responsibility.
But we can go.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, there is one extra slide in here. I'm gonna skip just for the sake of time. We are over time already. And so there was a discussion slide in your handout. We will ask more questions at the next meeting, but just to move on. This slide is just some resources. I sent out an email a couple of weeks ago welcoming everybody. These are all links that are in that. There are also links in this PDF that will be online. The budget or the legislative priorities is the one that's been approved by our board. The budget committee handbook is probably the easiest one to read about the rest. It's up to you how much you want to dive into them, the resources. The budget committee handbook is a good overview of Oregon budget law and requirements. And the last one is the acronyms for the district. And if you notice one missing, please let me know so I can keep adding to it. Lastly, to close us out, it's just open discussion, questions. Did want to provide you guys an opportunity to ask for information next time. If there's any information you want to see or data requests or information requests for our budget 102 meeting. And then I am open for one-on-one budget meetings. If you guys have questions, you want to dive deeper, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. So open discussion, comments, questions.
Or requests for next time.
So within our networks, we can start sharing that there's a survey. Okay, and that, there will be some,
Would it help if we send the link so
yeah,
that
that
you
would be-
have it? to
that would
share
be
with your
great. And then how other people can, attend one of those person meetings.
Once we have the schedule finalized, we'll let you
Okay,
know.
great, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I just wanted to comment on discussion items. This year, that was very engaging. So thank you for putting those in. It's nice to have dialogue throughout the meeting. So
That's great
Thank you.
feedback. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Any other business? We're done with the business, okay? Being no further business, such meetings will be adjourned at 7:17 on tonight's meeting. Thank you for all coming, and then we'll see you on April 14th at 5:30, right?
Yes, sir.
5:30.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
And for budget committee, we're gonna excuse everyone. A board is gonna stay for, 15-minute board discussion, and we'll give people just, 5 minutes here to cabinet, some of cabinet awesome. Yeah, so we'll take 5 minutes and we'll have the board. Hear me, I'm gonna connect with you,
Yes.
on the phone real quick. February 24th, 2026 Forest Grove School Board Directors Meeting is called to order at 7:20 p.m. We'll start with roll call of board members present. Alma Lozano. Here. Risa Franco.
Here.
Randusky. Here. Pete Truax.
Here.
Maya Andrade. Here. And Christy Kotke is here. I'm looking for approval of tonight's agenda. So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. All right, and the consent agenda is made up of routine, non-controversial items to be voted on under one motion. Are there any items within the consent agenda a board member or the superintendent wishes to discuss separately? See none.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second. Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, and we are gonna move on to finalizing our board advocacy action plan, and we do have a slide for that that is coming. We met in our first Zoom publicly noticed meeting with our board, which allowed our board time week ago to have a conversation about following up of our conversation that we had at the previous board meeting. And I wanted to just highlight tonight before we move on to our next item, where we sort of landed with consensus. One of the things we are planning to do between now and the end of the school year is to establish a regular check-in calendar plan with our House and Senate reps. And so one of the options this board talked about was perhaps inviting our rep and senator to join us at that Zoom time meeting. We've talked about other options of having them come to a board meeting and engaging in conversation, but we think we're going to try finding a time where they can join us at that Zoom session, which is a public meeting and would allow for two-way communication and get on a cadence. So we're having proactive, regular conversations, sharing what's going on in our district and also hearing from them. Specifically this spring, being able to hear from both Senator Solman and Rep. McLean of how the short session went and, you know, where our comments on how that helped us and also hearing from them on what they need from us going forward. The second conversation piece that we have talked about is continuing to be very intentional and proactive about strengthening and building upon our already positive relationship with our union leaders. We have new board members to the board. When I came onto the board, the union leads at the time, Sarah Ogle and actually Serena Fitz as well, both had reached out and we had some coffee conversation and just had a time to sit down and just get acquainted. It's no secret that this district has a very strong relationship with our union leadership and our leaders and our teachers in that conversation. We've seen that play out, especially just recently in bargaining. And we continue to highlight that, but as a board, we want to make sure we're being really intentional on continuing to build that proactively. Again, I'm going to use that word quite a bit tonight. So that is our second item. I think the next steps that we talked about was we're exploring what that looks like with the structure. We want to be really aware of time that our union reps are working, everybody's working full-time already, and making sure that it is something that fits into a schedule, but also something that adds value, and getting some feedback from our union leaders as well, what they are feeling like the board can do to improve those relationships, continue to help us grow. Director Truax, did you have a comment about that?
Yeah, I hate to be cranky and irritable wordsmith, but can we get rid of the word union and use association?
Yes, of course.
Because I need to justify that because that's when I was working with the classified association or with the that negotiation process. They very much wanted to be referred to as an association and not a union. And I think that gets away from the mindset or the image that we have had of negotiations when you're negotiating with the union. There's a different flavor than there is when you're negotiating with an association. The outcomes are the same. and the objectives of both groups are the same. And I think the communication is a little bit more genteel, for lack of a better word.
Noted. Yes, we haven't seen a thumbs up. I think too, one of the things we recognized this a couple of years ago as well, like how do we build into our system and structure ways for that communication to happen? We have a liaison, from the association that comes now, and also we built time intentionally into our board agenda to be able to allow space for communication there. But this was just feeling like we wanted to sort of connect personally and make sure that we're hearing directly from everybody and that we're all on the same page. And so I think I've said that 3 times now. Let's just try to have me say something one time. The third one, we are going to shift the focus of the summer retreat. Instead of more of a team builder, we did reach consensus around diving deeper into using that retreat as more of a way to advance our existing advocacy work. And I think all of these things are interconnected. And the fourth piece there that was mentioned briefly, but I think is outside of what the board itself is working on, is considering an additional lunch with legislators, but doing that regionally, maybe with the board chair group that is now meeting each month. So we talked about a couple different things in that Zoom of ways we could use a summer retreat time. But I think there's a couple things to explore what we can do as a board together. It was clear that the board valued that time. And then beyond that, can we expand and continue to build relationships across the region, their chairs? So that's something we'll explore and bring up to that chair group and see. Also, there's interest with the other boards in continuing to do work around what we did in January with our legislators, but the time and energy that went into the planning of that, and how can we do something on a smaller scale that maybe has impact? So those are the 4 pieces that we sort of built consensus around. I'm going to pause and ask for any additional thoughts that I didn't capture there, or comments, or adjustments. And Brees, I do know you're up there, so just, chime in if there is something you notice.
No problem. Summer lunch with the legislators, so, summertime's people are on vacation. How is that gonna work?
Well, we talked, like, as board chairs, we are all pretty connected with our reps and House and Senate reps. And by then, we will be kind of after primary, but but still, we do need to have some connection, and making sure we're sharing that information. So you're right, Kate, what is the avenue we can use to still be connected? We think we can be creative and find a way that maybe is more informal and a quick lunch. And maybe if there's 6 or 7 local legislators that can join us, great, but it continues the conversation. So
Well, maybe that's the opportunity for those people running for election after primary to come in to maybe to the board chairs and share how they're going to advocate for schools. I think that's really important because that's going to determine whether we want to vote for them or not.
getting ahead of me here, but yes, okay, noted that. So with this in mind and consensus from the board, what I'd like to suggest is that All Mine Eye and leadership can take this list and work with Dr. West in kind of putting some things on paper as to what we think this looks like, and then bringing it back to the board for next steps. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, and I would add that I would love to see both of you at those meetings. I would not want another board member there, because that makes a quorum, that makes a public meeting, and
Right.
we don't want to skirt that issue. So, but I think it's absolutely necessary that leadership be there so that the legislators get a message that it's not one person that's carrying the water. It's 2 people that have had conversations in an open setting with other members of the board, so that this is not some wild-eyed radical coming in and talking. but this is a cogent, adult set of people that are bringing valid concerns to those legislators.
Yeah, and I hear you there. I think I want to make sure I was probably talking about two things at the same time. That Alma and I, when we meet in leadership with Dr. West tomorrow, we will then take this list with the blessing of the board and sort of get some details down and then bring that back to the board. Separately, Pete, to your point, who and how we meet with legislators in the summer, I think that's a continued conversation that this board can have and, again, we should have together. So we make sure we're all very clear on where those conversations are and what they're gonna be. So I appreciate that comment. Okay, if there are no further comments on that, I'm gonna move to the second piece of our agenda, which is actually gonna be talking tonight about criteria that we believe are important to be an effective legislator in our region. We do have, there's gonna be some challengers this primary, I believe, in both the House and Senate races. And part of the advocacy work and part of what's developed in our advocacy work has been trying to communicate with legislators, not just ours in our region, but in the state, what we need from them as far as how they do the job. So as a board in the past, at least since I've been on the board, we have approached the idea of considering endorsing or talking about different pieces of legislation. We've done that publicly in the last couple of months with regards to bills on the floor. We have not really defined a process for what that looks like. And I think this conversation today is also going to lead us to defining what that looks like when we're thinking about potentially down the road considering endorsements and actually even considering how we talk with our community about people who are running for office and bills that are on the table and, just trying to figure out what our process is for that. So tonight, what I've asked the board to consider and be ready with is to have them bring 3 or more criteria that you believe are important to be an effective legislator, either criteria that you've noticed has been important or headed into these very challenging time for schools. What are the criteria that we need from legislators to make sure they're representing our school district, but also that, that we value? And the second question around that was, what are the 3 questions that you might consider asking potential legislative candidates? And so what I'd like to do, I know several of you kind of previewed you sent your homework in a little bit early. Brisa, especially because she wasn't sure if her audio would be working, but I'm going to start with Brisa. And what I'd like to do first is just have every board member, we'll start with Brisa, then we'll do Kate, Pete, Maya, and then Alma. Just list your 3 criteria. And if you want to say a little bit about each, great. If you just want to list the criteria, that's fine. And then we're going to move back through and ask, what are the questions that you'd like us to consider? And again, today we're just starting a conversation, so we're not making any bold moves or final decisions, but I think we're just getting things surfaced on the table to see where we are with what we look for. So Brisa, I'm going to ask you to start, if your audio is working, with the criteria that you believe are important for a legislator to have.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. I had some time thinking about this, and I think some important criteria or like traits to look for is someone who can communicate clearly and straightforwardly. Representatives should be able to explain their position and policy decisions in plain language so that their constituents can understand. I think another thing I'm looking for is transparency. And then I'm also looking for someone who takes the time to genuinely get to know the community that they're serving. This means listening to constituents, understanding the challenges that the district faces, and also remaining accessible outside of election season. Ideally would want someone who is engaged with our community and would be better equipped to kind of advocate for its needs at the state level. Thank you.
Kate,
I didn't do my homework. I'm sorry.
we can pass. Kate,
I will pass. I'll follow up at
That's fine.
Sorry, I apologize.
Pete.
Okay, my 3 questions were 1, and criteria, an effective legislator would possess the ability to offer up well thought out legislation, entailing conversations with people he or she represents, colleagues in the House, Senate, and those in other leadership positions throughout the state, both public and private. That's all one criteria. B, those conversations would have to be bipartisan in nature. Our perfect legislator would recognize that no one gets the whole of what she or he thinks. And last, our perfect legislator would have to be realistic enough to recognize when bills and laws have to be rectified and corrected, and would be willing to play a role in correcting that law or proposed legislation. None of us have all the answers.
Okay. Maya.
Sorry, a lot of it are like repeats. Thomas didn't copy anybody. The thing I said was accessibility. I thought that representatives should be accessible and actively engaged with their community and the community they represent, even after elections, as Lisa had mentioned. And then I really wanted to highlight kind of a commitment to the youth and education, and how they should prioritize education and actively consider the perspectives of young people when shaping policies. I also talked about transparency, and how leaders should be transparent. And I guess this also kind of connects to accountability, but how leaders should be transparent about the decisions and accountable to the people that they represent. And then my last one was collaboration. I think nowadays we see that a lot of us disagree with each other more than agree. And so I kind of added that leaders should be able to collaborate across differences and work with people who may not always agree with them. Those were my things.
Alma.
So I went ahead and put that the representative should understand classroom realities. Very much understand that overall. One thing that I had here was I haven't really seen a whole lot of representatives active listening to the youth. I mean, they are our focus. They are the ones going through the system and the process. I think that there should be a little more focus in discussing with them. I do have that they can disagree respectfully with either a legislative or law or the higher ups, and be able to, like Pete shared, correct any of those decisions. And then just be visible to the community, approachable.
All right, and mine does copy a few of those. My three were collaborative capacity, so willing to work collaboratively, but having some kind of experience in doing so. I don't being able to explain where they've done that and how. Practicing informed decision making, again, kind of what you're saying, Alma, like based on the community they serve, being around students, being in classrooms, understanding what's happening, but also doing the same at the district level and really understanding what is the work that's happening here because that is the money that they're allocating, and really having being interested in wanting to know more. And the third one, I haven't heard this mentioned yet, what was around teamwork, working as a team, but it was really us being able to be self-aware and analyzing how they're doing the job. And I was just talking to someone about this yesterday, about how often does a legislator step back to see how they're doing the job? And I have questions to go with that one, but when does a legislator reach out to get feedback about how they're doing their job? And what does that feedback look like? And how do they change how they do the job based on that? If we do a lot of taking in information and sharing information, and that I'm thinking of myself too, as a board person, where do we get feedback, honest, critical feedback to help us be better leaders? So that wanting to even get that feedback to me is a quality that I look for, but, okay, so that's a really comprehensive list.
I got.
Okay, do you want to add? Okay.
I would want to ask legislators, why do you want to be a legislator? And what is your goal, or what is your interest in being a legislator? Because I know these people become legislators and then they get on committees. And the last one would be is how do you educate yourself? How would you educate yourself about legislation in areas that you're not part of that committee? Because, you know, I don't know for sure, but I think it's like 8 people on the education committee and, you know, there's, you know, and the set, what we've been watching is they have like 1 hour on a committee and, you know, so how does that filter out to the others? And so how is that individual going to absorb it? They can make a very healthy decision.
Okay. And that kind of leads us into questions. So then the second part of that was what are the questions, if we were asking questions of legislators from a school board perspective, or personal perspective based on your work on the city, what are the questions that we would want legislators to have? And I'm thinking about if we did decide as a board to send questions out to potential candidates, to be able to just help them see what we would like to know as a board, what are those questions, what would they look like? And I think we'll go the same way, if that's okay. Brisa, do you want to start there?
Absolutely. I have, I think, my 3 primary questions. The first one being, how do you stay connected to the day-to-day concerns of constituents outside of election season? My second question being, what specific issues in our district do you believe is misunderstood at the state level, and how would you advocate for it? And then my last question being, how do you balance party loyalty with representing the unique needs of this district? And those are kind of my 3 questions that I have.
Okay. Kate, do you want to wait? Okay, Kate.
Brisa did it all, so.
I start, double star.
So it sort of took that. Mine is how well do you reach across the aisle? How well do you listen to constituents? And what would be your major concerns about improving Oregon for all of its residents? So I took the local issue and statewided it, if that's a word.
Okay. Maya.
Mine are a little more general, that's good, Lisa's. The first one is, how will you ensure, that you remain accessible to, students, working families in the underrepresented communities? For my commitment to the youth, I said, how will we ensure that students' voices are included when making decisions that directly impact our schools and future opportunities? And then for transparency, I said, if a policy decision you support has unintended negative impacts, because I think that's the reality of our world, how would you address that? Accountability. And then for collaboration, my last question was, how do you plan to work with colleagues who might have opposing views in order to pass meaningful legislation?
Okay. Alma.
All right, so what is one specific action you will take to stabilize school funding? That was one of mine. What is one policy you support to make housing more affordable while supporting local businesses and job growth? Because that affects the school too. And then what is one example of how you will work across party lines to pass legislation?
Okay.
I don't have any wisdom.
Okay, I think Kate, because you gave me a couple. I think my 3 were, this role requires you to work together with your community to build policy. Who is and should be on your team that you work with to do so? What stakeholders would you look to inform your decision-making process? And how do you currently reflect on how you do the work? How will you get feedback about your areas of strength and opportunities for growth are as a leader and a representative? And then several other the same, you know, reaching out, how do we do this work? So, that's good. I mean, Kate, and nothing to add there.
No, I'm good.
All right, so I think what that captures, I think we can sense there's definitely a few themes there. What I noticed there is there's a kind of a drill down on a couple specifics to our district. And then there's more general about style, how are you gonna do the work? And then I think there's a couple different themes there. There's definitely a theme of where do you keep student voice? How do you hear student voice? And how are you gonna be accessible to that? Are there any final thoughts, Kate?
how are they gonna communicate on a regular basis to school district, school boards? You know, how, I mean, you know, like, one of the things that we've been seeing is that a bill is coming up tomorrow and we're not informed. How are you going to inform school districts and school boards about upcoming, bills in a timely fashion so that they have accurate information? Because I think the communication piece is the big issue.
Anything else to add?
I mean, I would like to see someone who has actually worked with like a bilingual district, someone that understands kind of that role, especially for our district, which makes a big difference in how you go about at that level.
I would like to see somebody focus on getting stuff out of the silos and getting things glued together. Legislation, proposed legislation on transportation impacts schools. Transportation, the economy, if we, and I hate to use this word, but if we continue to hemorrhage jobs and businesses, people start moving out of the state of Oregon in even greater numbers than perhaps they are. That has an impact on education. So how do we work together to make this state more education friendly, but at the same time, make it more economically friendly? If we have to find a way to make the tax structure in the state of Oregon not only work for the individual and work for business, but also work for the state. That's a discussion that has to take place. This siloing is gonna kill us.
And I'll build on that, Pete, because I think you're speaking to something there when I'm thinking about silos, and we keep coming to legislators saying schools, schools, schools. And we do tend to sometimes forget that I am reminded often that there's transportation, and by the way, there's healthcare workers, and there's all the layers that our legislators are dealing with. So maybe some of the questioning too would be, what would you suggest for us as school board members to help you do this? Or like, what do we need to know to get out of our own silo? And maybe it's paying attention to a transportation committee once in a while, or understanding housing better, you know, and letting legislators know that this is a team. We're going to hopefully do this as a team. And what's our role in this beyond our school silo? So.
Well, and I think that goes to a local level, as meeting with local officials, meeting with Cornelius and Forest Grove. I hate to say back when, but back when I was mayor, we had meetings, joint meetings between the two cities and the school district. They didn't happen as often as I wanted them to. And sometimes they were a bit staged, but they were still being able to recognize the people on the street after those meetings and know who were the change makers, who were the decision makers in the other two bodies. So I would, and I will probably push for that kind of communication so that we can all have a public meeting at the same time and air our concerns and our agreements and our differences. Because we are finding that we're all grabbing at the same pot of gold, and it's not getting any bigger. So.
You know, one of the things that I see, is that, you know, with education particularly, it's a very archaic system, and every session, it's the same thing. It's, you know, and so I wonder is how how do we, I would ask someone, candidates, how do you evaluate your effectiveness? It's just not attending, town meetings and saying, okay, I've had 70 town meetings. I mean, it is more of, okay, I'm listening, but then you have to put into practice that you listened and you're going to do something effectively. And so and the second thing to that is, and you and I have talked about this, Christy, is that I think the potential of Washington County and the chairs getting together and then putting information out to the other board members and then just keep spreading it, is that we could really become a force in helping them help us. And that's really, for me, the big goal, is to help them. And because I think people really want to do what's best and what's right, but they're doing the same thing over and over again, and it's not effective. And I really love the idea of we putting together the chairs and talking and challenging these legislators. Town meetings are fine, and showing up for ribbon cutting, that's fine, and connections, those are fine. But we need to see action, and how are you evaluating your effectiveness in your decisions on these bills? I don't know how you do it.
No, and I think these are probably all the same questions we ask ourselves as a board
Yeah.
or are starting to, right? How do we even, did any of our advocacy work pay off? How do we even know? And I think I think these are the questions to be asking. So Brisa, is there anything to add from you?
No.
So from the sky, no. Okay, I think in the interest of time, and this has been a really good start, that we kind of take this, Alma and I in leadership with Dr. West, and kind of think on it and see if we can synthesize some of it into something that's a little more user-friendly, bring it back to the board to see what we think is just maybe a template that we begin to use to have discussions, and maybe help members of our community know what to look for when they're looking at people's platforms and what questions they could ask, and see where we go. So, all right. Okay, thanks, everybody. With that, I am going to adjourn the meeting at